Hello and thanks for stopping by. Today we're going to be painting up this Fomorian giant figure, and we're going to turn it from this into this. The very first step I took to this model was to simply put down a nice dark red or mauve base color for the skin tone. At this stage, we don't really need to worry about neatness. It's all about getting color on the model and just getting a nice overall coverage that isn't too thick. Like a lot of the models that I paint, I'm applying two thin coats to avoid clunkiness. Now, despite popular belief, you don't always need to do two thin coats, especially if you're just doing a base. Now, I'm using a very cheap craft paint right now that if I didn't thin down would just look terrible. Now that we have our skin tone base coated, let's go ahead and add a little bit of depth to it. For that, we're going to use a little bit of bronze skin tone paint, and we're just going to apply the dry brush technique. We're going to use a cheap makeup brush, and we're just going to go ham on this guy, getting it on as much as we can. We don't want to go too thick and get it into the crevices though, but we want it all over so that it'll make those muscles start to pop. Now, a lot of people look down on the dry brushing technique. They say it's for beginners and that it has no place on a very high quality model, and I disagree with this. This isn't necessarily an award-winning model, but the majority of the depth is produced with dry brushing, and I feel that it produces a very nice tabletop quality paint job without taking a day and a half to do. We're going to continue to add depth by dry brushing on some bone white. Now, we don't want to hit it as hard as we did with the last layer, but we still want to get a nice coverage. Here's a bit of free advice when using a cheap makeup brush. Remember that it holds a lot more paint than you think it does, especially when you're using it for dry brushing. They are great, however like I said, they hold a lot more paint than you think, and you'll think you got it all out and you're ready to start hitting the model, and as soon as you do, it leaves way more behind than you originally had planned. So make sure you really brush that extra paint out. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to make our own wash. We're going to use that mauve that we use for the base and a little bit of raw umber, which is just a dark brown. And we're going to water that down until we have a nice thin wash to go over and put into those creases. Now, I wish I would have been a little bit more precise with this stage, but that's what you get. In the next two steps, we're actually just going to hit it with some more dry brushing. First, we're going to go over with the bone white, and then we're going to very sparingly hit it with the dead white. Now, at this point, we have to be very careful to not get the paint into any of the creases or crevices that we just used the wash on. Otherwise, we just wasted our time with the last step. Again, when we start to hit it with the dead white, we don't want to hit it as hard as we have with the last couple dry brushes, but we want to make sure that the most raised edges are what we hit primarily. The next step is to start bringing life to the face. In order to do that, we're going to use some dead white and a detail brush, and we're going to hit up all the weird little ridges around his eyes and his mouth. Once we do that, we're going to start going over those boils or sores or whatever you want to call them, and we're going to use the blood red effect paint. We're also going to use that same bloody red paint to fill in the lips as well. Now, we're not going to worry about the eyes at the moment. We're going to move on to that pretty much last thing I do. The next step is to base coat the belt. We're going to use a nice dark brown or beastly brown as the bottle describes it, and we just want to be careful not to hit the belly or the legs or any other part of the skin tone. It'll be a bear to fix it. Next thing we're going to do is throw down a base coat on his little man skirt. We're going to use a light brown or leather brown, and we just want to again be very careful not to hit any of the skin tone that we've already painted. It will be kind of a pain in the butt to fix. Next we're going to add a nice black wash to the belt and to the skirt. This will help bring some depth into the clothes. While we wait for that wash to dry, we're going to go ahead and move on to the club. For the base coat, we're just going to use that same dark brown that we used on the belt. For the wrappings that are on the club, we're going to hit those with a nice bone white. We're then going to hit both the club and the wrap with a nice black wash. Finally, for the club, we're going to combine our two browns and we're going to create a nice mid-tone brown, and we're going to go over that with a nice dry brush. After the club, we're going to move back to the skirt. Again, we're going to combine our browns for a nice mid-tone, and we're going to hit that up with a dry brush. Again, you want to be very careful not to spill over and hit any of the skin tone or anything else we've already painted. At this point, correcting it will be a real pain in the butt. Combining our dark brown with just a little bit of black, we're going to create a nice dark brown, and we're going to hit up the main parts of the wrappings on his arm and on his legs. Another free tip is that when you mix the brown and the black together, don't mix it all the way. I'm talking like 90%. You still want to just be able to see the two colors. That way when you apply it to the model, it'll already come with a little bit of depth. Using some more of that leather brown, we're now going to go and hit the cloth or the fabric, whatever you want to call it, that's underneath those bits of leather on his arms and his legs. I'm not sure what you would call it, but again, at this point you want to be very, very careful. Bust out that detail brush because you're going to need it. If you make any kind of mistake at this point, you're going to have to go back and do about 6 steps to fix anything you mess up on the skin tone. So be very, very careful. If you do make a mistake and there's a little bit of spillover, don't freak out though. While I've kind of been harping on about how hard it'll be to fix, it can be fixed, okay? So don't freak out if you make a mistake and some of your light brown edges over. To add a little bit of wear and tear to our arm and leg wrappings, we're going to take a little bit of black and combine it with our brown, and we're going to do some stippling. This will add a nice amount of texture to the wraps, and it is very easy to do. While doing this, make sure you are very aware of how much paint is on your brush. If there's too much, all you're going to be doing is putting down another base layer. So knock most of it off. Not quite as much as a dry brush, but still a decent amount. The last step of the arm and leg wraps is we're going to take a nice black wash, and we're just going to put that on the parts where we use the lighter brown, the little bit of fabrics that are sticking out from the leather wraps. Moving on, we're going to base coat his little bracelet in a nice black. And to fill in the spikes, we're going to use a little bit of gunmetal. To add a little bit of texture to the wrap, we're just going to stipple on a little bit of light gray, or stonewall gray as the bottle describes it. Next up is the eyes. We're just going to fill those in with a nice dead white. I'm going to be very careful not to hit the eyebrows or any other parts of the face that aren't the eyeballs. Once you can see the whites of their eyes, you're going to go ahead and move on to the pupil. Now originally I had planned on keeping it milky white, but according to the lore they have some kind of like crazy cat eye which allows them to give deformities to people. I don't know. At this point I thought the model was really lacking of some color, so I decided to add some nice goblin green to the eyes. And what you want to do is you want to really water this down. You don't want to just go from pot to model on this. Water it down and give you that nice translucent shade. Because we forgot to while we were doing the belt and the skirt, we're going to go ahead and do the belt buckle with a little bit of gunmetal. Finally, we're ready to start on the base. Now for me, I will almost always go for a minimalistic base. The goal with most of my models is to make them game ready, and it always just seems weird to me that if, like, say I have my party encounter this guy in a cave, if there's a bunch of shrubs and stuff on his base, it doesn't make sense, and it kind of defeats some of the immersion. I know, silly little complaint, but I keep my bases pretty basic. You're just going to base it with a nice dark gray, and then we're going to go back over it with a lighter gray. We're going to use a dry brush. This will add at least a little bit of depth to the base so it's not just a boring shade of one color. But again, will allow it to be, used in a variety of different locations without it ruining the immersion a little bit. I know, silly, but... And then finally, we're just going to go back over everything we did. We're going to clean up any mistakes that we made. I added a few little highlights here and there with some dead white. But really, this is just the cleanup step. I also re-dry brushed the club because some of it had fallen off in the painting process. And there we go. One cursed giant ready for your next campaign. This guy was a lot of fun to paint. And if you're one of the few who made it all the way to the end, I want to say thank you. And if you feel like it, please subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends, whatever. I understand my production quality is not on par with a lot of other YouTubers that do this kind of content, but we're just figuring things out, and we'll get better as we go, and our setup will get better. If you want to help with that, go ahead and contribute on the Patreon. Till next time, guys, thanks, bye.